This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Rudy Giuliani has got nailed 3 times this past summer in one civil case, having been sanctioned by a federal judge. He got sanctioned in June, he got sanctioned in August, and he got just sanctioned today. All for basically the same thing, his willful refusal to comply with court orders and discovery obligations to turn over documents and electronic records to the other side. He's been playing hide the ball for the last year, and the federal judge, Beryl Howell in D.C., has had enough. So in the first sanction in June was $89,000 awarded to the attorneys for Ruby, Freeman, and Shay because of all the unnecessary hoops that Rudy Giuliani made everybody jump through in order to just comply with normal discovery components of the case. That never got paid. Fast forward, he's in default still. As we move through the summer, still hasn't produced the electronic documents. Judge calls everybody in for a court hearing, live, throws the book at Rudy and his lawyer and says, either you settle this case or you turn over the documents quickly, but you're in contempt, and I'm going to entertain a motion for sanctions. He still doesn't get the message. Pulls out his pocket, says he doesn't have any money, whatever he's saying. Remember, this is the same guy that flew on a private plane to Georgia to surrender and be arraigned. Put that aside for a minute. The lies to a federal judge. Then, in order to try to get out from under this whole thing, Rudy tries to settle the case a couple of times. One, his lawyer negotiates some settlement, but then at the last minute, because it requires Rudy to pay money to Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, Rudy walks away from the deal and says there's no settlement. And the judge reminds him, great, you have a motion for sanctions hanging over your head that hasn't been resolved. So Rudy says, oh, I got an idea. I'll craft a stipulation where I'll basically admit liability, that I slandered and defamed them and caused them damage and and it was done with malice and all of that. But I'll tell the press and everybody else, I'll put language in it that I really didn't admit liability. Well, look, in this day and age, you either admit and take a default judgment or a stipulated judgment against you on liability, and then you can go try your case on damages, or you don't. And the judge took one look at the stipulation, which Rudy said would stop the whole process of the discovery abuses, discovery sanctions, because it resolved the case. And she said, Beryl Howell said, this doesn't resolve anything. On one hand, you say it's a stipulation to resolve liability. On the other hand, you said you're not liable. I don't know what to make of it. But it doesn't solve your problem. And in most federal courts, sanctions for discovery can go on even if the parties settle their own cases. So that didn't work. And the judge says, I am now done. I am going to grant the motion for discovery sanctions. And she gave the most severe death penalty sanction she could on August 30th. She found him in default and took away his right to defend himself on liability. In fact, she entered a judgment against Rudy Giuliani on liability, finding that he defamed them, slandered them, with all the elements present. Not only that, she said, for good measure, I also find that punitive damages are appropriate in this case, which is punishment damages above actual damages that a jury can award. Now the jury's going to be instructed at the trial only on how big the check's going to be. On damages is going to be told as well that the judge has already found that they're entitled, the plaintiffs, to punitive damages. So put that on your list when you're awarding damages as well, jury. That just happened 2 weeks ago. So what happened today? Well, the judge had said, I'm also going to award attorney's fees and costs to the other side for a second time, related to all of the efforts they've had to do since the last time in filing papers, in arguing, in making argument, and all the way through to today. Put together your numbers and submit your application. And we've got the application. In fact, I think I have it right here. We can talk about it right here on Legal AF and on this particular hot take. So in particular, when you file this kind of application, it is generally called a application for attorney's fees and costs. And so what you have is, in this filing, them putting together all of their numbers. But they gave the factual background first. And what they said is, as the court is well aware, defendant Giuliani has spent over a year failing to fulfill his most basic discovery obligations, and his obfuscation of the discovery process has forced plaintiffs to waste time, quote from the judge, by wading through thousands of pages of gibberish judge's words, in search of some potentially relevant evidence, while his concomitant failure to produce any meaningful discovery has similarly brought this litigation to a standstill. That he's disregarded his discovery orders from this court, as to which his failure to comply ultimately necessitated the sanctions motion. And then they go on to remind the court that she awarded sanctions recently, including giving him the civil equivalent of the death penalty. They then went on to talk about the legal standard that the court should go through, and then talked about their need for recovery of reasonable fees. And they even cut Rudy Giuliani a bit of a break, because what they said is that we're normally entitled to our hourly rate, which is, in the case of attorneys working in Washington, D.C. for the firms that are involved, anywhere between $1,000 and $1,800 an hour. And for the public interest firm that was also involved, somewhere between $1,000 and $1,400 an hour, based on the seniority and experience of the lawyers involved. But like federal judges don't like to go up that high in cases like this. And so what they generally say is come up with a more reasonable community rate. And there's a matrix that's used in that jurisdiction. And what they said is, fine, we'll do that, Judge. We'll be happy with that. Normally, our bills, if you added them all up, hours times hourly rate, the total would be almost $200,000 for this motion. But we'll cut it to $105,000, which is right in line with the $89,000 that she awarded in July or June that hasn't been paid either. So right now, I assume one of two things. Judge Beryl Howell is either going to say, where do I sign the order, and award $105,000 with a clock ticking on interest for it not being paid. Or she's going to say, you know what? Given the circumstances, I'm going to raise the attorney's fees rate back to the $200,000 number or split the difference. It's going to be one of those two things. And that's going to happen really soon. And then Rudy Giuliani is going to have to figure out, maybe at the Bedminster Golf Course fundraiser that Trump hosted for him at a $100,000 entry fee, how to pay the couple $100,000 he's going to have to pay over to Ruby Freeman and Shay. Because if he doesn't, I assure you, the judge is going to find him first in civil contempt, then criminal contempt, and then she's going to put him in jail. And then he'll pay the money. Because at that rate of kind of progressive escalated discipline that comes at the end of a federal judge, the last one, criminal contempt, grab your toothbrush, you're going to jail. And that's what's going to happen here. I assume he's going to take some money out of what was just raised for him with Donald Trump hosting at the scene of the crime, Bedminster, and use it to pay off his problems with Ruby Freeman and Shay. But remember, that's just the issue of sanctions. We haven't even had the jury trial yet. That jury trial is going to be sometime in the fall, like right in the thick of the criminal prosecution in Georgia, where they're going to pick a D.C. jury against Rudy Giuliani, who lost his bar license in D.C. and is disgraced. He's going to lose that damages case. I mean, they're already going to be instructed by the judge as follows. Hi, thank you for being part of the jury. Before you even got here, I made a decision that the defendant, Mr. Giuliani, is liable for defamation. You are not to consider any defenses. You are to assume that he's liable for defamation. And by the way, that he did it with malice. And by the way, that he is responsible for, if you want to award punitive damages, I found the grounds for punitive damages are present. All you're here to do is figure out what damages they've suffered, including attorney's fees and costs, and award it to them. That's all you're here, and the amount of punitive damages that they're entitled to. In other words, how big a check. That's the entire trial. It's not going to take that long. And then he's got to pay it. And if he doesn't pay it, they're going to chase his assets. They're going to attach his assets. They're going to lien his assets. They're going to garnish his wages, and they're going to own his podcast, because this jury is going to award Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman millions of dollars, including for punitive damages. If E. Jean Carroll got $5 million in her case against Donald Trump, these two double that. I know there was a sexual abuse and rape component to E. Jean Carroll, and I'm not minimizing it, but given Rudy Giuliani and given these two plaintiffs and the punitive damages that are available in federal court, it's going to be at least north of $10 million. We'll follow it right here on hot takes like this one place, you know where, the MeidasTouch Network. Help them on their YouTube channel get to 2 million free subscribers. And then you can follow me, along with my co-anchors, Ben Mycelis, Karen Freeman McNiffalo, on Legal AF, the podcast we co-anchor on the MeidasTouch network. You can get it audio everywhere you get audio podcast and video on YouTube. And then you can follow me, Michael Popok, everywhere on social media at MS Popok. Until that next hot take, this is Michael Popok, Legal AF.
Hey Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram at MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.